including major mob figures. And the most notorious example of this, it also was closed down after it was exposed, was the Castle Bank and Trust in the Bahamas. And I show that there are connections, or the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia, which was a bank which financed the first major shipments of opium and heroin out of Southeast Asia into Australia back in the 70s. And I show that there is a kind of continuity underlying all of these banks, and they go back to a very strange figure, Paul Helliwell, who was a major figure for the CIA and OPC and helped set up the support networks that were operative in Thailand and Burma. But he also was the counsel for a bank which Meyer Lansky used to launder drug funds coming out of Southeast Asia. And that underworld CIA connection, I think, merits more attention than it gets. It's very difficult to learn anything about Paul Helliwell. But most, anyway, you have to go to my book to see what it's all about. Mm-hmm. But that's a factor in, there are all kinds of people in the CIA. There's one corner of the CIA, the corner which absorbed the old OPC, where all the drug trafficking business began. That has been a factor in our politics abroad, and I suggest also perhaps in our politics at home as well.
Well, I would agree. I think that this really goes to the very heart of the issue, that we go into these nations, they become even larger drug dealers than they were before. It comes back to U.S. covert operations in the CIA in cases like Iran-Contra, in cases like Mena, Arkansas, now in cases like Afghanistan, right out in the open. And like you said, they launder this money through these big banks. But even with the BCCI banking scandal and it going down in the 90s, not many people were prosecuted. And it just continues under these new banks. How does that happen? How does it go from one organization? Because obviously BCCI was really set up to do these money laundering operations, not only with the CIA, but international intelligence agencies abroad. So how is it that gets shut down, and now we have Citibank involved, now we have Bank of Boston involved? How does that evolution take place?
Well, I think the involvement of Citibank and Bank of Boston is a bit different. They took drug money. The charge against BCCI was that they were actually involved in making the drug deals and making the connections that were set up between the CIA and people in Afghanistan who became drug traffickers. This is very extreme because before 1979, Afghanistan was not really a player in the international heroin traffic at all. Hashish, yes, and there still is a market for Afghan hashish, but heroin was not produced locally. Opium was not produced in any great extent, except for local consumption, which was not huge. And now, of course, it's 93% of the world. So you've got to say that the CIA bears a large share of the responsibility for this. And we don't get anyone moving to end it. And this is where I would bring in Citibank and Bank of Boston, that why should they want to see the drug trade end? Back in 1982, for example, Mexico was about to default on its debt payments to the banks. And this would have meant technically, because these were very major loans, that technically Bank of America, Citibank, would have been technically bankrupt. And so Reagan stepped in and lent our money, your money, my money, tax money, to Mexico to continue its payments. Before they did that, they had the CIA do an estimate of how much of Mexico's foreign exchange earnings were coming from the drug trade. And the CIA produced this report, which is actually reproduced in a book called Underground Empire, saying that for Colombia and Mexico, 75% of their foreign exchange earnings are earned from the drug trade. Well, those are the earnings that Mexico could then use to pay the interest payments on its loans to Citibank. So there is no will in the financial superstructure of our country to end this drug trade, which helps us in this extraordinary position of being the world's largest debtor, and also pretending to be, I don't know, I don't think it may be true for much longer, the world's largest power. This is a history of the decline of empires, which we saw in the case of Britain in my lifetime, and in the cases of Spain and Netherlands.
Well, what we're seeing really is a symbiotic relationship between these banks and global drug trafficking. It only benefits them on every single level. Let's take some calls for Peter Dale Scott. Let's go to Jared in Texas. Jared, you're on the line.
Yes, hello?
Sir. Yes.
Yes, I guess some of the only questions I could ask for him would be, what would your comments be on his thoughts about secret societies, and was he part of a secret society himself? And another question I would have, just to finish it up, would be, do you think that it can still be argued that some of the main reasons that he was assassinated was because he was going to get us out of Vietnam, he was going to abolish the Federal Reserve, and he wanted to, as he put it, shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces?
And of course, you're talking about JFK. Let's get Peter Dale Scott's take on John
Kennedy.
Kennedy.
There are two questions there. To take the JFK question first, I can say with confidence, and I think it's now historians are finally agreeing with me, though it took them a while, that yes, Kennedy did have a plan that had been approved as a National Security Action Memorandum to withdraw the bulk of U.S. troops from Vietnam by the end of 1965, and starting with 1,000 troops by the end of 63, and that plan was overruled almost immediately when Kennedy was killed. That doesn't prove that that's why Kennedy was killed, but it certainly, when you had not only this consequence, but it was a suppressed consequence, because we didn't know the facts about this until much later. I know that there's also the charge that he was going to end the Federal Reserve, and that I'm still investigating. It's worthy of investigation, but because I have to get multiple sources for any claim I make, and I see it on the web a great deal, and I would say that's worthy of investigation. Now, coming to secret societies, yes, all the major universities, particularly the old private ones, have their secret societies where, like the Porcellian at Harvard, which had Theodore Roosevelt, and Franklin Roosevelt couldn't get in. They blackballed him. That's how secret they were. You have Skull and Bones at Yale, which had both candidates in the 2004 election, George W. Bush and also John Kerry. I think that's a symptom of a larger phenomenon. It's not really whether you were in a secret society or not, but the extent to which what I call the overworld runs this country. The people with elite backgrounds who go to elite universities and make friendships with other people there. I think that in the CIA, the early histories, the early years of the CIA, I think secret societies did play something of a role there, but that's because of the high percentage of overworld people in the CIA.
And there was actually a Hollywood movie that they put out where they kind of showed the evolution of Skull and Bones as a recruiting ground for these intelligence agencies.
No, if we want to understand this country, we need to inform ourselves about Skull and Bones, too. But, people are always looking, when I think of all the secret societies that people have pointed to as really running the country, Skull and Bones or Opus Dei or the Knights of Malta, there's so many different candidates. Council on Foreign Relations is not really a secret society, but it's up there. They're all aspects of the overworld, and they overlap with each other.
Exactly. All right, let's go to our next caller. Let's go to Matt in Ohio. Matt, you're on the line. Yes, sir.
Hello. It seems you talked earlier about the United States foreign policy and how that often supports and mingles with drug growers. You've got, during Vietnam, the CIA interfaced with Kun San in the Golden Triangle for heroin and opium. Obviously, the Contras in South America for cocaine, and now again Afghanistan for opium. But there's been a number of allegations that not only is our foreign policy kind of, coupled with these traffickers, but members of our federal government, particularly the CIA, actually, or even the military, actually bring narcotics into the country and sell them here, or basically use them to get funds for the arms trade. Mm-hmm. In your experience, in your research, are those allegations credible, and where are the best sources?
Well, let me say this before Peter answers. I do delve into this in Invisible Empire, and a lot of times they'll use proxy nations for plausible deniability.